The biggest curse the Marlins fans ever got was winning the World Series in 1997. Because after winning that World Series, they were trading players during the parade. Practically, they were trading player like Moises Alou and players away. How can you do that after winning a World Series?
Doesn't make any sense.
The Marlins went from winning the World Series in '97 to in 1998 going 54 and 108. Like you lose a fan base like that from the jump. No matter who is going to take over this team, you are not starting from zero with this fan base. You are starting in like hell and purgatory. Like you are starting way below in the net. Like because this fan base has seen a lot of crap, and a lot of and there's been highs and lows like in every fan base and every organization. But in the recent history of this organization, there has been a lot of lows and barely any highs.
Yeah. What is up, everybody? We are back for another Tranquilo Sports Talk. We are back in the OG location of the Pinecrest Performance Golf Simulator Room, where we usually record our podcast, but haven't done it in a while. But we're here with Alex Aguirre. He's a beat writer for the Miami Marlins on Lemon City Live. So we're definitely going to get into pretty much all Marlins talk today. And we're excited. It's a long overdue conversation. And I think it's a very timely conversation considering
100%.
Where the state of the Marlins are and the things that have happened over the last few weeks. I know that there's Florida Panthers hockey going on right now. We will let that conversation kind of take care of itself, considering that we're recording this on a Tuesday. Lost game 1. We don't know where we'll be for game 3, but the main focus of this is some Miami Marlins talks. And I thought you were the perfect person to come on.
Appreciate
Obviously, you cover a lot of the Marlins, and I think you're one of the more versed people. And you and I have had some conversations through LinkedIn,
for sure, yeah,
which is awesome. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit about what you got going on at Lemon City Live and some of the projects that you're working on there.
Yeah, so I've been with Lemon City Live for 3 years. This was my 3rd season covering the Marlins, and it kind of fell on my lap. The way I got this role with them. I met the guys from Lemon City, Edwin, Gus, and Achilles. I met them years before, or not years, a couple years. It was during the pandemic.
Okay.
I met them, and they were so gracious, and they were so, I guess, willing to give me an opportunity to be their Marlins beat writer after very little interaction in terms of from a working relationship. But they knew that I was very passionate about this team. So it's my 3rd year, and basically me and our other Marlins beat writer, Gabriel Garcia, he covers more of the weekend games. We kind of tag team covering the Marlins, and we do recap articles, player profiles. We do stuff during the All-Star break in terms of breaking down first halves and specific players.
Right.
We also cover anything Miami baseball related. So recently the Serie del Caribe was here.
Right, yeah.
Gabriel and I, we had the opportunity to go there and cover a bunch of games. We saw a no-hitter by Team Venezuela, so that was really cool. So we cover pretty much anything baseball, sports related. In South Florida with UM baseball, FIU as well.
Pause up, baby.
Pause up. Gabriel's more on the collegiate side of things, and I'm covering more with the professional side with the Marlins. But yeah, no, we got a lot going on with the Marlins. And then I have a baseball podcast with Lemon City. It's called First Pitch 305, and that's basically a Marlins podcast that's for Lemon City.
Okay.
And it's my 3rd year with them, 2nd year doing the podcast, and it's been great. I've had a great time covering the team, especially last year in the run that they had. But it was a really, really kind of lucky opportunity that kind of fell in my lap that I did not want to pass up. And it's been great in terms of being the new guy a couple of years ago.
Right.
And then you're around this, kind of like in sports, you're kind of like the rookie. Mm-hmm. And being kind of the new guy in the press box, you're intimidated because you're seeing all these names that
it's very true.
You read their articles, you see their work on TV or online, and it's like, wow, okay, now like you're with them, and you gotta kind of prove yourself that like
you belong here. You're not like just a guy that's just trying to come by and
exactly
make it about you.
Exactly. So, and you'd think that it's going to be a lot of like, cliques and kind of like, the veterans hang out with the veterans, kind of like you see in a lot of clubhouses, which I had the opportunity to see firsthand a couple of years ago with the friction with Miguel Rojas and Jazz.
True.
So like I thought that it was going to be like that, going to like a clubhouse and you have your veterans with your veterans, your younger guys with your younger guys. But I was so lucky that I had a lot of these veteran beat writers kind of like welcome me.
That's awesome.
And kind of show me the ropes. Okay, this is how it's kind of done in a press box. They teach you that in school, like the do's and don'ts of like, don't be a fan. So I can definitely not be wearing this in a press box. By no means, they'll tell me to take it off or like figure it out.
Interesting.
So they teach you the do's and don'ts in school, but once you're in it and I instead of being like, and I'm not trying to demean anything by no means, because that's where I got my start with FIU and the Beacon, but it's different covering a collegiate game at FIU than you're actually at a professional setting.
Right.
And and even with the Marlins, it's just, the level was just extreme in terms of the difference that I was like extremely intimidated, but it didn't take very long to kind of find my footing. Okay, this is kind of like my role in the press box. The veterans are going to be the veterans still, but I'm going to kind of carve out my role and kind of see what I can do with Lemon City Live. And Lemon City Live has been covering the Marlins before me. They've been covering the team for 7 years. So, I'm just happy to be part of it and being part of this journey. So that's what we got going on with Lemon City. There's tons of stuff as well. If you're not just a Marlins fan, if you're a fan for other sports as well, they cover Inter Miami, the Panthers.
You're saying F1 too.
F1 as well. So check it out. It's just something for any sports fan in South Florida.
I didn't know that you guys had so that baseball podcast that you guys have. How often are you guys releasing an episode?
About once a week.
Once a week.
About once a week, and then we basically just recap what's going on within the organization.
Got you.
What we've seen, what Gabriel and I have seen. I have different guests every episode as well.
Oh,
mostly guys within the press box. A lot of guys from this other Marlins media outlet called Fish on First.
Yep. Familiar with them. I follow them on
They have an
X.
arsenal of beat writers, and they're all amazing.
They're
all very
talented.
good.
They're very good. A lot of them I follow, and that's where my main source of Marlins news.
Exactly, and they're very great and they're very informative. So so I like having a lot of those guys on the show to kind of just converse about the state of the Marlins and what's going on. But I think this, for me, is kind of an opportunity to kind of like flip the lens and instead of like kind of like bounce with you.
Exactly.
Because when I do with that podcast, I'm not saying I keep it PG or anything like, but I keep it more on the lines of like, this is the team that I'm covering, but I feel like, and I got to keep it kind of like,
I get you.
But here, I'm glad we kind of get to sit back and just take a deep breath and kind of just be like, let's kind of
talk as like the fan in you.
Exactly.
Almost, where they're, like you were saying, press doesn't allow you to be a fan. We're going to talk numbers. We're going to talk the realistic situations without an emotional attachment to the situation, essentially.
So today I'm just gonna
let
it all out. Let it all out, man.
That's good. I when you said that, I didn't really like look at it that way. It makes sense. I have zero press background. I am not a press by trade. I didn't study any of that. So a lot of this is a new world for me, and I went to a press box for the first time, had media credentials for multiple PGA tournaments at this point. But going into that media room, like you see it on TV, but there's not really a connection. You just listen to what the question as a fan, you listen to the question asked and you wait for the response, right? And you only see the response usually, right? You don't even know where the question is coming from, who's asking the question or anything, right? As a fan. So when you walk into this press room, you have your area, right? Like your desk area, and there's the backdrop for where the player or the coach, whoever it may be, is going to answer the questions, and you got 10 minutes to ask them questions. And the way it works, at least where it worked there, was they're going to give priority to the veteran guys, right?
Exactly.
And you're lucky to get a question. The bigger the talent, the harder it is to get a question.
The more limited opportunity you got. Yeah.
So I'm here, a small first experience, small guy, no one knows who the hell I am.
I know the feeling.
So I related with that, and it's cool for you to say that because it's true. You got to earn it. It's earned. It's an earned respect in the space. You need to prove who you are in that space. Ask the right questions. Ask different questions than maybe not everybody else is going to ask, and kind of get creative with it. Which that's the part I enjoy. It's like, let's get creative with it. Let's ask questions that are not necessarily the same questions that beat writer A is going to always ask, right? Or beat writer B is always going to ask. And that's fine. That's their tone. That's their angle.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's where, you know, you have that creative liberty when you do get those opportunities to go in and ask whatever question, as long as it fits.
Right. And you know, when you're in a press box, in a press box, it's very regiment-like. As soon as that final pitch is done, people are grabbing their mics, they're grabbing their recorders, and they're sprinting down to the press box. It's kind of like
it's go, go, go.
It's go, 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 and then everyone's kind of huddled around. And as kind of one of the, you know, if you want to categorize it in a sports theme, me and other kind of like media outlets were, you know, the ones kind of waiting our turn to ask those big questions. And then like the Miami Herald, Volley,
right?
You know, like
Volley Sports, yeah.
So
5 Reasons, do they get in there too? Or
they cover the Marlins from time to time, but they're more focused on Heat and Dolphins,
right?
And Panthers as well. So from time to time, I have seen 5 Reasons Sports beat writers there in the press box, but normally when it's your turn or my turn to ask a question, that's where the creative part you're talking about kicks in, because in a way on the fly, you gotta think of something creative, because pretty much by the time it's your turn, everything, and it never fails. It will never fail. By the time it is your turn, and all the veterans have asked their questions, they have checked off all the boxes of what just happened in that game.
100%.
So that's where the creative aspect comes in. And as an outlet that maybe not a lot of people might recognize as Lemon City, by being creative and having that outside of the box approach can help you stand out and be like, hey, I want to maybe listen to what Alex has to say, as well as get my feedback from the Herald and
you know your reputation as one of the individuals that's asked questions is built based off the types of questions that you ask. If you're coming in, like I'll never forget, one of the guys in the first PGA tournament that we covered already had the tone of asking the really difficult questions around live golf. And
that's tough.
And kind of like just really digging, right? It wouldn't just get on the surface. It would ask a question and he would follow it with another one immediately, right? Not so that the next person can ask a question. He's like, I'm going to get in my 3 questions and I'm going to ask them so I can get everything out of you and squeeze you and squeeze you and squeeze you.
100%.
And dude, he got like, not aggressive, but like, you know, he's pushing the boundaries of like, almost like, dude, come on, right? And it makes you could tell it makes the golfer uncomfortable. It made the people in the press room a little uncomfortable. Turns out to be, and I don't know this, he was in the Netflix documentary of Full Swing.
Really?
And one of his questions around the live was presented in that documentary.
So he was kind of going back. He was kind of
because that's his reputation, that's his space. So for certain guys, they may not even entertain it. A guy like Rory, who's high status, knew he almost had an obligation to answer it at some capacity, right? But going back to your point, it's that whole thing, like based off the questions you ask is the reputation that you build there. And some players may want to answer your question more than hearing the same boring question that this other guy is always asking and doesn't want to hear it maybe after a loss, right? Or after an injury. But yeah, here you come with maybe more of like a different tone or a different kind of angle or a different outlook on it. And that maybe presents you more opportunities to ask questions, because it is tough.
It is super tough. Wording is key, but there's also a very, very delicate balance in how you ask that question, who's asking the question, who is the player receiving that question. It's a weird kind of formula that needs to go in your favor as someone on the media side of things. And what I mean by this, to kind of, I guess, break it down more, is that you know, a player, for example, let's just use a baseball player that has a very high status. He's retired now, but the first one that came to mind was Miguel Cabrera. Let's say Miguel Cabrera is post game, and he just lost close game. It wasn't even his fault, but it was a tough loss. You know, he is not going to respect the question from Joe Schmo than one of those veteran beat writers that he's seen day in and day out. But the delicate side and the balance is that if that Joe Schmo was able to somehow be creative and word it in a way that Miguel Cabrera will not take offense or not rattle him even more after a loss, then he did his job.
Yeah.
And then the vets around him on the media side notice that too. So that's what I meant earlier about carving out your role as well. It's not stepping, because that's the delicate balance as well. You do not want to step on anybody's toes, which is why if you go to any press box, you keep your mouth shut until all the veterans ask their questions, and then that's when you go. So you just got to find that balance. And for me, I'm not going to say, oh, I went to a few Marlins games and then I had it in the bag. I know there was still a huge learning curve in terms of, okay, like maybe tonight's not the right day. Maybe tonight's not the right time to ask a question. Maybe
That's a very good point.
Maybe today is the right time. Maybe today is not the right time to ask coach about the bullpen, but maybe next week is. Depending on a specific performance. So, especially someone that's still like, carving it out.
Yeah, that's a
you
very
got to
good
pick
point.
your spots, and that's just the name of the game in terms of media and post game, interactions. It's very delicate.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've experienced that firsthand where I'm like, I want to get this question into this guy, and then it doesn't happen. And then a couple of weeks later, I get the opportunity, and it's in a way better setting. It's in a way better space, and I'm like, you know what? Thank God it didn't happen then, because I would have maybe, even if I got the question asked, it maybe wouldn't have been effectively delivered the same way I would have wanted it. And I maybe wouldn't have gotten the same, in-depth analysis or, response that the individual gave me. Whereas if I would have asked him on the fly, I would have gotten maybe like a 20-second answer and that was it, So timing is big. Timing is big.
And the thing is, the more you get your experience in that industry and in that field, there's always that balance between not crossing the line and on a personal level with that player.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times, and it happens, that journalists and reporters become close friends with athletes, especially if they cover them for a long period of time. So, you don't want to bring what you know about that player into your work and into your questions. But then again, that's more of a morality, type of mind.
Just being, some guys are ruthless though.
Of course, sometimes people, like you said, dig in because that's their job. They try to get those type of answers. And it just depends how experienced you are, what type of relation you have with that athlete, how deep you can dig that knife in. For now, with my role with the Marlins and how I cover that, I keep it very,
like surface level,
kind of very, kind of more on the cautious side, because I'm still, as I mentioned, developing that kind of relationship with those players. Okay, like that's Alex. Okay, like he's gonna ask me these type of questions, but this is something you feel out little by little, and you earn your stripes. But along the way, I've been loving it. It's been a huge blessing.
Dude, it's a very cool experience. Obviously growing up being sports fans, it's almost like the dream, essentially.
It felt like that.
It feels surreal when you're there, and you're in that experience and you just take it as it is. And when you get those opportunities to ask questions, you make the best out of it. And I think that's where like that authenticity becomes very relevant to it, and experience over time. These are guys that have been there for 30 plus years, You're there for 3 years. Imagine, the gap is very large. So imagine what you can accomplish in 10, 15 years. It's like you want to get everything done that first time around, but God knows, like, there's only bigger and better things, on the horizon in that space when you think about it. Because you look at those guys. Those guys were you and I at one point, and we were, climbing up. So I think there's a lot of awesome stuff that comes with it. And I do think it's like a fine line of like, the respect aspect, but also putting yourself out there and taking a little bit of a chance, and
but you got to pick. For me, my opinion is you just got to pick your spots. But obviously, you do need to take that leap. You do need to take that chance, because you'll never know if you're capable at the end of the day. And if you are, and if you do accomplish that, then that just boosts your confidence, but also it elevates yourself around your peers.
100%.
Not saying they don't respect you, but just saying that you can just garner their attention, and then you realize, okay, like he's up to something. He's doing something a little bit different, because I feel like that's what people are always looking for at the end of the day.
Especially different angle.
In this world of just fast digital news is at your fingertips. People always want something new. People always want something fresh and creative. So and little by little, people, it's so funny and it's so humorous in a way how you think we've reached our limit from a creative standpoint, but yet somebody else comes up with another idea, outside the box type of mindset.
Yeah, saturated as it is, yet there's still so much opportunity out there of like creative ways to cover. Because it is, everyone's doing it at some capacity, it feels like. But what is your kind of creative angle to cater to your audience that wants to consume it?
And I guess to piggyback off that is, the way I found what I am more comfortable and successful at from a media standpoint is long form reporting. here's my mindset behind it. And, you know, it might not be the most creative inducing, or it might not be the most like traditional, but here's the thing for me. People are gonna get, like I said, it's a very fast, quick-paced world in terms of gathering your news. And people are gonna want it instantly. A lot of these writers from the Herald, MLB.com, they've been doing that at it for a long time, and they're really, really good in terms of just producing the news as soon as that first pitch ends or the game's over, and they gather their quotes. They're really good at throwing it in there and tossing out a quality article. So here's my thing: is that I'd rather go carve out my lane and go into something that's I'm more comfortable, which is just kind of giving my opinion, but also recapping the game. So it's going to be a lot longer form of an article compared to not saying no one is better. I'm just saying that it's
a different approach.
A completely different approach. Now, is it the most, I guess, sexy or most, attractive in terms of wanting to sit down and read it? Not necessarily for a lot of people. I understand that, especially someone who has seen a lot of different forms of writing and reporting, especially from a digital space. I was like, well, for me, I feel most at ease, or most in my zone.
Exactly.
When I am pouring everything out.
Yeah.
Not from an emotional level, but just from a game level.
Everything that you know,
exactly,
you want to put in there.
Exactly, and then so when you do get the chance to read my articles, people can see that it's going to be it's a lot longer, but you're going to get from first pitch to last pitch practically what I saw and what I took from it, and that's where I feel like that's how I'm carving out my lane.
Yeah.
Every guy from Fish on First. All those guys they have a plethora of beat writers, but the beauty about it is every single one of those guys has their own method of reporting, has their own way of covering a game or a player profile or so on and so forth. So that's the way I have found my, I guess.
It's a test and learn too. You're gonna figure out what works and what doesn't at the end of the day. But you always want to stay true to what makes you passionate about it at the end of the day, right? Because you don't want to drift too far from who you are as a beat writer, right? And almost follow the social norm, maybe to get a few extra clicks, right? Or because that's the other thing, right? There's so much clickbait out there, right? And you could fall down that trap and almost play that game. But then again, does it dilute who you are and what you believe in, right? And I think that's always very important, is like just staying true to your colors, and you'll attract the audience that makes sense for you.
Exactly. No, I feel it's completely normal, and people hate writing. People hate it. And I get it. It's not for everybody. For some reason, that's where I feel comfortable. That's where I feel like this is not easy. It's not, but once you get that rhythm and once you find that groove, kind of like a pitcher, once you're locked in, it's kind of just like playing catch, and then and that's that rhythm you feel as a writer once you're locked in. Yeah. That long form, that 1,500 word article seemed like it was nothing. It was just kind of like a breeze. So, but that's the beauty of media as well. Everybody, it's limitless in what you can set your mind to in terms of creating something, especially in sports. Yeah. Every day there's something new that comes out.
It's true. And baseball season's a long season.
Yes.
I want to get into the Marlins and the current state of them, right? So before we start, I want to actually share a clip with you here. This was with Adrian Lorenzo, who we just did a Stay Tranquilo podcast with. Nice. And obviously, you know him. You said you knew him kind of like
briefly,
right?
Yeah.
So he used to work with the Marlins. He was he handled a lot of the Latin American recruiting and a little bit of the player development side. But he had a good point, while he was there about the current state of it. This is a small clip of it, but definitely want to get your feedback on it.
Those are instructive. They're like, okay, you can get to the postseason, but this isn't about getting to the postseason only. This is about like sustainable winning in the postseason. I think Mike McDaniel said it on a podcast. He's like, you don't want to go to the postseason and get your ass kicked. Like, you want to go and be there and belong. And I think that when the Marlins sat there and assessed the current state of things, they didn't feel they were one or two or three moves away from where the Phillies are or where that grouping of teams are. So you have to take a real look at yourself and decide, like, is this our window? Do you push and hit with this window? And then when the injury bug also hits you hard, because it hit them, it squared them up. You know, it squares you up with Sandy, it squares you up with Yuri, you know, and it hit him with Max Meyer. It just kind of like, you got decimated in a short amount of time. That's why you can never have enough pitching, right? It hits you in waves.
Even Luzardo now is on the IL right now.
So what happens then? It puts all the pressure on the picks and the things that you did to hit on a really high level. Some do, some don't.
Right.
And that's where the fans could be like, oh, well, you did, hit better on these.
I'll stop it there. Right. If you want to get deeper into that, you can watch that clip.
Very interesting.
And he went into everything from experience, which I want to go, get in with you as well.
Yeah.
But the point that he brought up there, which has kind of been the continuous cycle of the Marlins, right? Is we're a player away, right? We're a player away, and then it's a rebuild, right? Then we're a player away. We're a player away, and then it's a rebuild, right? That's kind of what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
It felt that way with the Stanton era and Yelich and the unfortunate passing of Jose Fernandez.
Yeah.
It felt like that. It felt like that even when we had just won the World Series in 2003, right? But he brought it up there where it was like you have to take a look at yourself in the mirror as a team and say, is this team ready to win now? Or was it a team that wasn't ready to win now? So that's where I want to go with you, right?
Sure.
I think there's two parts to this, right? Where it's like, why do we continuously play this game of break and start, break and start, break and start? But before we even get into that, do you think that before all this went down with Arias, that this team really was maybe a player or two away? Or were we really like a fringe start over team?
Yes and no. They weren't a fringe team that they had to rebuild, but they were not a team either that were
to build like that sustainable, like he was talking about.
They were not a
you're not going to be a
player
playoff team.
No.
You can be a playoff team, like he was saying. Mike McDaniel says you could be a playoff team, but are you going to be a playoff team that's going to win and make a run?
Right, and the Marlins did not have that type of team.
Got you.
The Marlins had a team that was probably a borderline 500 team that got not fortunate, not lucky. They earned
favorable
those wins.
breaks. We talked about it there. Yeah.
Favorable. They a lot of very close one-run wins.
Exactly.
That the year before last year, they were one of the worst one-run teams.
Very true.
In baseball history. So that was such a huge shining beam from last year. It's like, wow, we're winning. We're finally winning these close games. We're finally getting over that hump. But when you take a step back, you look at this roster on paper from head to toe. There wasn't that umph. There wasn't that Atlanta Braves umph behind. There wasn't that LA Dodgers. Even the Cardinals, like in terms of their consistency as a franchise, Phillies as well. So, them making the playoffs last year, it was awesome. It was a nice story. But if you really knew the team and you really knew the ins and outs or even just saw the team on paper, as I mentioned, you knew that they weren't going to get past Philadelphia in that first round. Yeah. Especially with Sandy getting on that.
No Sandy and no Yuri.
Exactly. And then you guys mentioned that clip, a bunch of names, but also Edward Cabrera and Braxton Garrett missed the first month of the season.
Very true.
So I think Braxton is still out. Yeah. Edward just came back recently. So this team was decimated by injuries. So, you were banking on so much of last year, which was slim wins, a lot of players exceeding expectations. You had a player who hit 354 in Luis Arias. You had you had a player in Sandy Alcantara who did not have his best stuff coming off a Cy Young year, but he still was a workhorse for you and eating up innings, especially
going 8 innings almost pretty much every start.
Every time before he went out with Tommy John, which alleviated a lot of Yuri, being on that innings limit. Then a lot of guys, Braxton exceeded expectations. Yep. Edward was a huge
Luzardo had a good year.
Luzardo was, became the Marlins number 2. The bullpen was amazing. Tanner Scott was the reliever of the month in the month of September. So a lot of players did really well. Then the Marlins acquired Josh Bell and Jake Berger at the trade deadline. Both those players were probably the best trade acquisitions in baseball because of what they produced. If it wasn't for them, they're not in the playoffs.
Of it as well. Exactly.
But even after all that I just said, they were still not a player or two away because of how talented and how hard it is to win in baseball. Because if you look at the great teams, the consistent teams, they have their core, which is Marlins haven't had for a while. They have their core, and then they plug in and plug out players to keep that core alive.
Right.
It's harder in baseball, obviously, with a bigger roster. You hear that type of philosophy in basketball, plug in guy, you keep that core and you plug in players. it's a little bit harder in baseball with a lot more moving parts, but that's essentially what you do. If you want to be one of these long-running franchises that don't get their asses kicked in the playoffs, first round, and then they go home, they make a run, and then next year they make another run, and then
you see it in multiple organizations.
Exactly. So this team, I understand that this team has had a lot of fire sales and a lot, but I think this team was already going in that direction. There was no sustainability at the major league level in terms of this repeating.
Yeah.
And then from a minor league standpoint, the Marlins are one of the worst farm systems in all of baseball. So that's a terrible recipe right there.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of depth at the major league level, and you're going to bank on down low.
But this is the fan in me, and I know a lot of fans out there are thinking the same thing. But how do we have one of the worst farm systems in baseball when we did the Yelich trade, we did the Ozuna trade, we traded Stanton, we traded all these big pieces when we were there, what felt like we were there, right? One of the best outfields in baseball, decent pitching rotation, could score runs, all that fun stuff, right? D. Gordon, I think, was on that team. Right? So
Martin Prado, it was a very deep team.
A good team deep, right?
Ichiro Muto was your catcher.
Tons of trades after again, right? And then it's like, okay, then here we are, we're getting the young talent. So why, after all those trades, do we have a terrible farm system?
So that's pretty much the Marlins' last fire sale. We're going to another one, as fans, FYI. But that was the last Marlins fire sale.
So basically you're saying the fire sale didn't work?
Not at all. Not at all. But if you look at the Stanton trade, Stanton was traded and it was a salary dump. There was Marlins. I think we got one prospect. I think that didn't turn out, and they got Starlin Castro, and he was a 2-year rental player. He actually had pretty good seasons with the Marlins, but they were a terrible team. And then if you look at the Yelich trade, they got Monte Harrison, Lewis Brinson.
Oh God.
Exactly. And I believe Jordan Yamamoto. None of these players are in the major leagues anymore. These are fringe guys, fringe players at best, AAA guys that you call up, in a pinch.
Right, you move them around if you need them. Yeah.
At best, because then again, if you look, their numbers are horrific. All of them: Monte Harrison, Lewis Brinson, and then if you look at the trade for Ozuna, they got Sandy. That was I believe they got Zach Gallen, but they traded that for Jazz. And they got this other player, Magneuris Sierra, who I believe is in the minors right now or out of baseball. So that trade
didn't provide anything outside of Sandy.
Right. The Marlins could have had Zach Gallen, but then you don't get Jazz. But then but Jazz, as you see, is a very 50-50 player.
I love Jazz, for the sake of personality and baseball and stuff like that. But it's tough when you look at the pieces together and you obviously want. I never want to bash a player and it's fucking hard, bro.
It's hard. I mean, a player like that, I get what you mean. He is so physically gifted.
He's a stud of a talent, but he just hasn't translated into what you just see out there.
Yeah, he strikes out too much. He doesn't put the ball in play. He doesn't hit for average. He has incredible speed, but you can't use it if you don't get on base. But he has pop as well. But I feel like he's going for pop more than speed and creating havoc like that on the base pass.
Right.
But I also feel like, he's just one piece of many pieces that need to step up as well.
Of course. If you're going to build it around a guy and he's that guy, you got to see better numbers at the end of the day. That's just the reality. If he's going to be the piece that you build around.
So I mentioned, Ozuna, Stanton, and Yelich. Nobody
didn't translate into
anything. The only player that translated from those three trades was technically Sandy and then Starlin Castro because he was already an MLB player.
Right.
But none of those minor leaguers, those prospects that they got, some of them made it to the majors, but they were fringe at best.
Right.
Fringe at best. And that's a huge L on the front office for the Marlins.
Right.
And how can you strike out on all those guys? Because that's how the Astros did it. That's one approach that you can take. That you shut it down. Orioles did it. You shut it down and you build from the ground up. And the Astros have had long-lasting
success. Yeah.
And with a couple of World Series to say for it. And the Dodgers, same thing. Obviously, the money speaks as well.
Of course.
But they they
knew that they had the pieces where then they can go now and say, hey, we're willing to spend money. Let's go. We have that arsenal of young talent that we can build around.
They know how to develop, and then they can trade those guys. Well, the Marlins are not in that position, but at the same time, how can you strike out all those guys? How can you miss out on all those draft picks, all those prospects that you are developing now because they're in your farm system?
Yeah.
Why were they playing so good in their farm system that were so attractive for you to trade for. And how come when they come to Miami,
Are they falling apart?
they're falling apart and they can barely make
can't
it
translate into
so
baseball.
That's a huge
Gotcha.
that's a huge part on the Marlins developmental team. Now,
Which is that developmental team still in place right now?
parts of it, yes.
Okay.
Little by little, the Marlins front office has been,
I know they brought in a lot of analytics.
right, and they brought in a lot of new names in the front office, and slowly that Jeter regime of those employees, excuse me, but they're like the little pawn, like the chess pieces. But those employees, they're little by little, they're trickling out of the franchise.
Yeah.
And they're no longer with the team. So that new philosophy that Peter Bendix is trying to bring it is trickling in.
Right.
But this team we now at least know what their path is. They're going to rebuild, and and it sucks for fans. It's terrible, but it must be done.
It was
because,
essential.
And also, if you think about last year's trades for Jake Berger and Josh Bell, they traded away their best prospects for those guys. So a depleted farm system became even more depleted to get those two players.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Jake Eater, one of their best pitching prospects, was traded for Jake Berger. Khalil Watson, who was a nutcase, I get it, in the minor leagues, and he was, creating a lot of problems in that sense, was still one of their better positional player prospects that they traded away to get rid of Gene Segura to get Josh Bell. So they paired him with Gene to get Josh Bell, and then so now, like I said, you had a bad farm system. It's even worse now.
Some pieces you had are gone now.
Exactly. So Marlins are working with scraps at the minor league level, and there's nothing really to look forward to at the major league level, because okay, let's call somebody up, bring some life into this team like they did in 2003, Dontrelle Willis and Miguel Cabrera. That team was a couple players away. And instead of going for players, because the Marlins were still a small market team in 2003,
100%.
Their highest paid player was Pudge with $10 million. They decided to call up some players, new faces, bring some life, and that turned out very, very well, as we saw. So the Marlins don't have that though. Marlins don't have. Let's call up a couple of guys, bring some energy.
Max Myers, I feel like, was the only piece really that they've leveraged. Max
Myers, right?
He's looked like he's pitched well in his 2 starts, and then they
send him down, on the innings limit. And that's another discussion. That's a huge baseball debate, not just with the Marlins, but in baseball in general, which is babying pitchers. Innings limits, and
it's such a weird line, because then you got so many guys that have been hurt over the last 2 years too, and then there's the whole pitch clock thing, and is that the reason why, or is it too many innings, or has it just been these guys are being worked for so many years prior to getting to the league? I mean, it's a lot of factors that play into it, but I feel like one that does play, especially with these young kids, these young pitchers who kind of, at a young age already know that, okay, my thing is pitching, which is hard. This doesn't happen to a lot of guys, because when you're younger, you kind of play all over the field, especially even in high school. Even if you're a good pitcher and a good hitter, you'll do both. Yeah. And a lot of these guys who are very talented pitchers in high school and are very gifted, throwing hard a lot, the velocity is there, and they're super young, but they're lighting up the radar gun. Of course, you want to see more. And of course, by throwing harder and throwing, just lighting up the radar gun, either you're going to get a lot of attention to go to college, or you're probably going to get a lot of attention to get drafted. And by the time you're like 17, 18 years old, around that time, by the time you do, God willing, make it to the majors, you're probably in your early 20s, entering your mid 20s. That span of time right there, you put a lot of stress on that arm. 100%.
That arm that is still developing a lot, still has a lot of room to develop and grow and get stronger. And you're not, I feel like, enabling that arm to do all those things, because you're applying so much stress and so much, not pain, because, I can't speak for every pitcher, but of course, it can lead to pain. And a lot of these players, younger players, hide that pain or lie about that pain to continue to move up, to continue climbing the ladder, to get to their dream,
because the window is like this.
Correct.
So they know.
Correct. So that's just one aspect of the many facets that can lead to why all these guys are getting Tommy John surgery. And the Marlins, for some reason, I don't know how, but they've been cursed by everyone getting Tommy John. With Yuri, Sandy, now Max Myers came off it. And now I think, and I don't know, Jesus, I don't think he's going to need it, but it's just
Luzardo's hurt right now.
Right, but it's not leading to Tommy John. But what I'm trying to say is that a lot of this stuff is unfortunate. But then it goes back to what I'm saying is, what's going on with this Marlins organization? How come it's the Marlins, it's happening here.
Right.
You know, like why is it happening here? And I don't
anywhere
hear
else.
about any of this massive pitching injury bug that's happening to any other major league team.
Yeah.
Why is it
one
happening
thing's
here?
one arm, but if you're having 3-4 arms hurt,
Right, yeah.
there might be something wrong with the current system in place.
So hopefully Peter and his team, when
Look into that.
they kind of revitalize and kind of maybe, I don't know, revamp that system because something's not working from a pitching health standpoint and from a development positional player standpoint.
Yeah.
Those two things are so vital, and they have none of it.
Yeah.
And they're lacking in pretty much every facet.
It's a recipe for disaster.
And you see here on the field, a lot of this team, on paper, they got better. I did like the moves they made, even for the lack of for the little or one move they made in the offseason.
Tim Anderson.
They still traded for Nick Gordon, which I did like that move. They have this, not prospect anymore, but he's kind of like a fringe player, Dane Myers. He had an amazing spring training. He hit 400. But he didn't start the year with the team. So they sent him down to the minors. So it's like, I questioned that move as well. But that's a different story. But the thing is that they had a very quiet offseason, but there were still some moves to look forward to, and yet it hasn't translated. Nick Gordon, his power is somewhat there, but it's not hitting for average. Tim Anderson is just riddled with injuries, and he looks like a shell of himself as he did last year.
Yeah.
And then the injuries with the pitching staff. So you're throwing out a bunch of not no-names, but a lot of inexperienced guys.
Guys that would not be there.
Absolutely. Pitching meaningful innings. But I know we're still in the beginning of the season, but when you dig yourself an 0-9 hole to start the year, pretty much every game after that is going to be pretty meaningful. Because
you basically got to win a lot of games.
Exactly.
From then on out.
So, and then you have these inexperienced players playing meaningful games. You have these inexperienced relievers pitching high leverage situations that they have no business being in. And that's because a lot of guys overexceeded last year.
Well, that's exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah.
It's just the over-exceeding and the unrealistic expectation of what this bullpen was going to be this year. Because we saw flashes of it last year. Guys I hate to say it and always put names, but guys like Nardi, guys like Puck, they were a little inconsistent at times. And their off-speeds can hang a little bit, and they give up big runs and poor times. We've seen it, and we've seen it already very early in this season. And it's like kind of like that where we were talking about it before, where this team, although made the playoffs, their run differential last year was in the negatives.
Horrific.
They were winning just a lot of those close games and getting those good breaks, right? And that's what you deserve to do, and that's what will make you a playoff team when you're in contention late in the year, right? Winning those close games. But the reality is, a lot of it was a little bit of a facade and a little bit of smoke and mirrors behind
100%.
it, because we were not the team that we met an unrealistic expectation, it looked like.
Yeah, and they couldn't score runs. The pitching
It
barely held through. The pitching was not amazing, but it was just good enough. It was just good enough to scratch and claw their way to the finish line to reach the playoffs.
Exactly.
Josh Bell, the way he hit in that second half. Jake Berger, the way he hit in that second half.
They carried us. The way that lineup
they arm players like that.
Piggybacked off of each other, and you had a Rise hitting 354 with the combo of Bell and Berger in place. You knew you were going to go score 3 runs. Like, just that combo alone was going to manufacture for that at one point in the game. But then it was just a level of inconsistency that came with the bullpen after, and that's translated even here. Because Ariz was hitting 305, I think, before he got traded.
Yeah, he's 303 right today,
He picked, and he started slow to the year.
Really slow.
So he picked it up and back to his normal ways, which is incredible what he's even able to accomplish in this league today. Which I guess then will take me to my next question.
Sure.
Right? Arias gets traded. Is the telltale sign of the fire sale, right? Was it like almost like a thought at first, then it happens, and then everyone's like, okay, here we go again, right? That's how it felt almost, right? Because for some people, maybe it didn't come to a shock. For a lot of people, it was like, I would say for the general fan, it was like, oh my God, here we go again. I started to love Arias. He's a freaking stud. And my fan base, was gravitating to a player like him, and the records he was breaking and all this stuff like that. He brought a lot to the table when it came to that, and it would sell tickets, right? Because you're like, is he going to break the record? Is he going to break the record? Later in the season, those things translate to ticket sales, right? So that happens, and here we are, right? What do you think of that trade in the aspect of like what we got for it? Do you think it was a good trade?
I mean, why the first thing that came to mind for me was why now, in the month of May when the trade deadline is quite some time from now.
Well, what's his name? Peter
Bendix.
Yeah, it was like a trade we couldn't refuse, basically, or an offer we couldn't refuse.
Right, but the Marlins got 4 prospects in return from the Padres, so I can't give a grade, I guess, right now because we haven't.
It's impossible, right?
Yeah, so but it's just that same old story you're mentioning, though. It's like, okay, trade a good player, get prospects in return. Let's see if they turn out. And the Marlins have a recent history of none of these prospects doing well except for Sandy. So that's the same old story. Here we go again. Was the writing on the wall for Arraez? In my opinion, it was, because and finally, in a way, I'm glad Peter Bendix finally showed the fans what his direction was, because he was so in the gray area, in the dark, in the shadows of what. Are you going to compete this season?
Right.
You're coming off a playoff appearance. Why haven't you made any moves this offseason?
Right.
What's
they didn't give him a long-term contract either, which was like a big question mark going into the offseason too.
Correct. And then they declined Skip's option for next season to be the manager.
Really? That I did not know.
They declined Skip's option to be so it's like, okay, so you're doing.
This was a year of limbo to begin with, for the most part.
Right.
You know, when you really look at it from the whole picture and the whole lens of things.
So basically, you know, it's not the way to run a franchise if you have like an experienced team. But when you're new to the team, as Peter is, he's going to try to make it his own. I understand his approach. He's going to try to make this his thing, his philosophy, his way. So that's why this was the first domino to fall, and it's going to continue. I wouldn't be surprised by the time the Marlins reach the trade deadline. Josh Bell is gone. A veteran piece like that, even though I think he's hitting below 200, still though he can be a good piece off the bench, or he's a switch hitter as well. Can DH, play first base. I'm sure a playoff team would like to have that piece on their bench or in the mix, you know, to get at bats. And he deserves a change of scenery as well. A lot of the general talk in the media, especially local media, they're happy for Arraez, and I'm happy for him too, because he's going to the Padres. They're a lot better situation than the Marlins from top to bottom at the big league end.
But they can't win either for some reason.
Yeah, no, they can never get over the hump, and
they've had the team to do it.
They've had the team, and even about a decade ago now, when they did Matt Kemp, they got BJ Upton, Melvin Upton. They tried putting Yasmani Grandal. I think they tried putting a massive dream team together. That didn't work out either. Yeah. But it's still, though, even out there,
better situation, 100%.
The Padres, even if they're all those crazy moves and stuff, they've been able to regroup and sustain something. Yeah. So the Arraez is going somewhere that's they're in a lot better situation. So we're all happy for him. Yeah, San Diego's a pretty good market, you know. Yeah. So and that's just the first piece. Josh Bell's gonna go. Now Luzardo's hurt, so you can't do much with that. But his name was tossed around the whole offseason.
All offseason. I think the Yankees were in the mix. The Red Sox. I mean, pretty much every big market team was looking at least to make a trade, but it didn't ever happen.
And it's like, okay, you trade Arraez now, then what was your point of keeping Luzardo then? If this is the approach you're going to take. So it's like...
Right. It's just the weird...
I'm not going to grade Peter Bendix on his first month and a half, or I guess a whole offseason as well, but not even a full year in his role. You got to give that some time to critique him and how he's done. But... it's his first couple of moves obviously are not going to be fan friendly, because it's going to be a lot of trades, a lot of trades for prospects. Then the guys you're getting, and if you do get major league talent in return, it's just probably a body to fill to finish the season. Yeah, you know. So any veteran player on this team is probably going to get traded, or at some point, or just let them walk in free agency at the end of the season. Yeah. And in a way, I'm glad. Enough of this. Replenish that roster. If you're going to go small market approach, then do it. Yeah. But if you trade, and I've said this God knows how many times, but if you trade for prospects, and it's so hard to tell, but you better be damn sure.
It's got to work.
You better be damn sure these guys better develop into at least suitable, respectable MLB players. Yeah. We're not even at this point. Marlins fans aren't even asking for the next Miguel Cabrera. No, Marlins struck gold there. And they almost did it with Don Troll, even though he kind of flamed out. But still, though, like Marlins fans aren't asking for that. Give us a respectable ball player that can go out there and hit me 250 with 20 home runs and 75 RBIs and call it a season.
Compete.
And compete. You know.
And then from there, you can kind of evaluate what you can work with from there. You know?
And the Marlins have this guy, with Jazz, who is a phenomenal, has an amazing talent, but he can't even, he's hitting, I think, 250.
Yeah.
And
No. He has never been a guy that has hit for average, and he also struggles to stay healthy too.
Exactly. So the only thing I can tip my cap to him for is, yes, being a team player and trying to be that leader and owning up. Okay, I'm going to go to play center field and I'm going to try to learn a new position at the big league level. That's tough. So I do respect him for that. But this team has a ways to go, and the way they're going to do it is the small market approach. So trade. And this is just the only thing for me arise was, why now? I'm sure you could have gotten something something for prospects. I'm sure another team out there would have given you something similar in that regard.
Yeah.
So I think they pulled the trigger too quick, but it was going to be done at some point because he has the most value right now at any player on the team, even because with Luzardo out as well. So
the way it all went down too in the middle of the game as well.
I think it was so low class.
Yeah, it was strange.
It was. You
see those guys that got pulled from the minor league game in the middle. The guy was on second base. I think he was for the Padres, and he's the one that finds out that that he got traded, and they literally took him out of the game in the middle of the game. And I get it; that's a little bit of a different case. No injuries.
Right, they got to catch a bus, and then they got to do it at the minor league level. It's different, but it's tough.
It was just weird how it all went down. Could we have gotten more? Who knows? According to this guy, it was something that it was an offer that they really liked, and I guess they must really like those prospects.
I hope, because
I mean, it goes back to that department that he's brought in. He's a very analytical guy. You hope that their system of identifying what's good and what's not for the pieces that they're looking for is the right approach, because that's like your point. That's what they're banking on.
And post Loria, when the Marlins got prospects in different trades as well, those prospects haven't translated either, because all those prospects we mentioned earlier in those 3 trades for Stanton, Yelich, and Ozuna, that was in the with Jeter and like in that Loria transition. So it was a bit of different feel.
True.
And I just feel like, though, it was more of just like the way the Marlins approached these big fire sales was kind of like recycling. It's like, okay, let's do it. Well, I feel like now with Peter, it's like, this is our approach.
Yeah,
we're gonna do it like this.
He's got to build his system, and that's just the reality of the fact of it. If not, then you're gonna just be on that hamster wheel, and you're not gonna really produce anything. That's how I felt like
the whole Loria era felt like. It was just a hamster wheel of chasing that 03 magic.
And we were competitive enough, but we were never a playoff team.
Never.
It was like we were fringe around 500 around there. It's like, can we make that late push? And we never really made that push.
And then when Jeter finally came, the Marlins were a terrible team.
Yeah.
And then they had that.
And they thought he was going to turn it around with Kim and him.
And then that didn't work out. Jeter walked out. And then Kim, obviously, it's unfortunate, because I did like her.
Everyone liked her, yeah.
I did like her. I was rooting for her. I think
was that more of like a mutual separation, the Kim
thing?
I
feel like that. And from what I've been, from what I've heard as well, is she wanted a bigger role. She wanted a more of a bigger say.
Right, a voice.
Correct.
Yeah.
And obviously that comes with more money.
Yeah.
More salaries, more pay.
Got it.
And the Sherman and his team said that that's no can do around here. So she decided to walk away and find something else.
Did she end up going anywhere else after?
That I don't know. I don't know. But I'm hoping she did, because I
remember the Red Sox were in the talks of maybe having her as their GM or something like that, but I don't think that ever transpired.
I hope she's working in baseball in some capacity, because
she's talented. She knows what she's doing.
Yes.
For sure.
And she did help this team end a 20-year playoff drought.
Yeah.
But it goes back to what he said, though. It wasn't sustainable, which is the one flaw I give Kim, is that you had to deplete a really crappy farm system to just get that playoff appearance.
Right. But how worth is that? Unless you win a World Series, then you can make the argument, okay, it's like we bought a rental for the trophy.
Kind of like what the Rams did in the Super Bowl a few years back. They went all in.
They went all in, and then, they're feeling the repercussions, but they've done a good job of
That was cool, though, yeah.
Of a short window. But yes, they basically rented out everything to go get it, and thank God they got it.
And the Marlins, kind of did that on a smaller scale for a playoff appearance. It's not worth it in the long term. It's not.
You got to go you got to go and contend in the playoffs. It's not just to show up.
But here's my thing, though, with Peter's whole philosophy, whole approach with everything. He's coming from Tampa Bay.
Right.
For listeners out there, Tampa Bay has never won a World Series. So here's my thing. They made it to a World Series in the but that was also the 2020 COVID year. And they also made it, and they lost to Philadelphia.
Interesting.
Was it Philadelphia? No.
When they lost the World Series?
Yes, so they lost to Philadelphia, but the Yankees beat Philadelphia. I got
Right.
those years confused.
Yeah, yeah.
But so the Rays only made it to 2 World Series, and they're only a few years younger than the Marlins. So you're telling me then you're going to bring an approach that hasn't won anything. That's the overall grand picture. That's just me being very cynical as well, like me being kind of a prick as well, like in a way. But I just feel like, you know, you want to give us long-term some success from what you're bringing to the table, but what you're bringing to the table does not translate into the
Hasn't
big
proven
win.
to actually translate. Yeah.
Are the Rays a good franchise? Yes.
Competitive.
Extremely. But making the playoffs pretty much every year in a very competitive division, the AL East.
Yeah.
But has not translated to a single World Series win.
Interesting. That's a good point.
So it's like, great, we're going to have this long-term, scrappy, fighting success.
Is it going to translate to a World Series?
Yeah, you know, it's hopefully, I think the Marlins do have a bigger payroll than the Rays because money does talk in baseball. There is no cap. You know,
Right, yeah, you can go and get whoever you want, but it also doesn't translate to a winning formula.
Not at all.
Because we've seen it with the Padres, we've seen it with the Mets, that they've gone and they buy everybody they wanted and didn't win. Even the Yankees. I mean, you can argue they're competitive as hell, but they haven't won the World Series in a couple of years now, and they have the roster to do it. And if they don't do it again this year, you got to really start questioning things there.
Yankees never blow it up, but they're definitely they more question the front office and that mechanism behind everything.
It's never the coaching or anything like that.
And then, but Aaron Boone, I think, is going to be. He's been there for a while now.
He's on the hot seat. I'm sorry.
Exactly. So
Got to be.
But here's the thing though with Tampa Bay and how, for people listening, kind of get a better idea of how they would run things over there. As Andre said, they're more analytical heavy.
Right.
Stats run things. They're very matchup heavy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but from a player personnel standpoint, they have a core.
Yeah.
They've developed a core of players. Obviously, they traded away Glass now to the Dodgers, but he was part of that core with Tampa Bay in terms of all these great young guys that they drafted and developed and created a competitive team with. They still have pieces of that core, and little by little, like I mentioned, they've been plugging in, you know, veteran guys and you know, smaller deals, you know, $5 million deal, $10 million deal for 1 year, 2 years, you know, something like that. And you plug it in and you plug in your pieces like that, and that's how they've sustained this, you know, run of making the playoffs, making the wild card, you know, like, you know, being a tough team, being a tough out though at the end of the day because they haven't won it all. But from a Marlins standpoint, though, from a Marlins fan standpoint, that sounds like baseball heaven, though.
Exactly.
Making the playoffs every year and
pick your poison. It's like at least I want to
Series.
see a competitive team and make a couple playoff runs. I mean, at that point, you make it to the playoffs, anything can happen. You know, I mean, you can make the same argument about the Heat. You know, competitive as hell over the last 5 years. Couple unfortunate events. We could be sitting with 3, NBA Finals rings with us, but right now that's not the case. Injuries play a part, but at least it was a competitive-ass brand that was out there, and fans were showing up, fans were rallying behind it, and the culture has been built there, right? And the product is always going to be good because we know we're able to build that. Even on paper, if we don't have the best team, we know that we're going to build that product because we've built something there. The Marlins haven't been able to build that identity, and I think that's the biggest problem in all of this, right? It's like we're always trying to figure this out. Then new faces are coming in, new GMs are coming in, and it's really hard to build some serious momentum around it and build that longevity, right? I mean, Dolphins have struggled with it for a long time. Maybe we think we're figuring it out now. You know, Marlins have struggled with it, but the Heat seem to be that epitome of it. And you look at certain organizations out there that are like that too. The Patriots for a while did that. A little bit now kind of seems to be a little bit of smoke and mirrors about what was carrying it there.
Yeah.
But there's just certain organizations out there that have seemed to always be on the right path and have that culture. The Spurs did it for 25 years with Popovich.
Yeah.
You know, like there are just certain organizations that have it figured out. And to me, it just starts with the internal at the top, you know, and it just funnels all the way down to the players.
Couldn't agree more with you, man. I feel like it, especially for the Marlins, you know, they're a smaller market team.
Yeah.
It needs to start from the, you know, sometimes like the Yankees in the 90s.
Right, you're not
gonna
gonna be that.
You're not gonna beat everyone to death on a baseball field and just light it up and then, you know, win over 100 games.
Yeah.
Like, you can't. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
And keep it like that. What the Yankees did in that era was very special.
Right.
And, you know, with the Marlins, they need to have an identity from the top and it reaches its way down to the lowest minor league level. And I'm glad though that at least we have somebody here to give us an identity. If Peter came in, he's like, we're gonna spend money, we're gonna go out. Okay, great, fine. That's our identity. Then. We're a big market team. We're big spenders. But we're on the other side of things.
If he could figure out the identity, the thing that worries me a little bit is the Skip thing, because I felt like Skip brought a good culture into the locker room.
He's not coming back. He is not coming back.
That's crazy.
And it's a shame too, because that's the identity part. That's the consistency.
That you see, that piece probably hurts me the most out of like trading all these players and all that stuff. I like Skip a lot.
But he was hired by Kim, not Peter.
True.
So it's kind of like one of those college things.
True.
A coach
you
comes
see it in
in.
the NFL too.
Yeah.
They bring in a new GM and they clean house. Some of them might keep a couple pieces, but for the most part, it's a clean slate. It's their way, and that's what they're building.
And I feel like if this is it. Then so the next couple of years, it's probably going to be
ready for a
But who knows though?
journey.
Because maybe these prospects do develop
quickly.
and they can make an impact at the major league level, and they become, instead of being really bad and struggling for 3 to 4 years, it's only maybe for a season or two, and then they kind of become a 500 team. But that's just up to the baseball gods at this point. Like it's just
You're
that's just
almost like praying for a miracle at this point.
But that's how bad it's been with the Marlins. And less than a 40-year, because the Marlins are 31 years old.
Right.
In less than a 40-year span as a franchise, they've had a handful of fire sales.
And he brought up a good point too. If you really look at it, if you're going to look at it from that lens of like 30 years as an organization, Rangers took 100 years to win a freaking World Series or whatever it was, something crazy amount of time, right? And here we won 2 in our first 8 years, right? So it's like you're not going to always be good either, right? And you're going to go through these weird phases. It's just been a painful last, what is that? 20 years, I guess.
20 years. It's going to be 21 now at the end of the season, but that just shows you from the last, when they won the World Series in 2003 till to today, they have 2 postseason appearances,
and one was the COVID year.
Correct, and then that's because there has been so many different head coaches, so many managers, so much movement in the front office, so much player personnel movement, and that all trickles down to no fan loyalty. No one's going to be going to the stadium. No one's going to be recognizing players. So, this Luis Arias trade is just another example of what has been going on in this franchise.
Cycle.
We're just hoping now as fans that once this fire sale finally is over, these prospects that come in translates to something sustainable. But this is the Luis Arias thing. I'm kind of, rip it off like a Band-Aid. This is just the first one.
It's just another piece. You got to bite the bullets and just take it as it is. As a fan, you keep rooting for your team. I think that's at the end of it, and the root of all of this. It's like, I know it's hard. I know it's painful.
It's a shame,
but
though.
we got to stay true to our teams and stay loyal.
They could have found their second baseman of the future, or at least for like a span of time, like Luis Castillo, for example.
Right.
He was with the Marlins from '96 to 2005. Almost a decade. That's a long time. But Marlins fans are not even having the luxury of getting acquainted with the player, getting attached to a player for a 4 or 5 year period. And I'm not trying to bash this player, but what the closest thing that the Marlins have to a long tenured, close player with this franchise is Miguel Rojas.
Yep.
And Miguel Rojas has had a career in terms of a utility player, and has had a long career. Good for him. But that's not a player you build a franchise on.
That wasn't the piece. No,
and then you look, and then the next second longest is John Birdie, and I love John Birdie.
Wow.
Really?
He's the next longest?
And he's gone. He just got traded to the Yankees right when the season started. So John Birdie's not on the Marlins anymore.
Oh, shit, I didn't even realize.
In the first week, right when the season started, the first week.
He got traded in the beginning of the season.
To the Yankees.
I'm like, why haven't I seen him?
So Miguel Rojas got traded last year, but those were your 2 longest tenured guys, and it's like you can't.
There's nothing at this point.
You can't build a fan base on 2 players like that. You can build a fan base.
Sandy is like the closest thing that's like build that momentum with the Sandy Sundays or whatever they would do, like Sandy Islands, Sandy's Beach. There's that. So I think the Marlins are going through another rebirth, and it is just the reality of the fact, and I think fans just have to accept that, trust the new management, and we'll see what the next 5 years look like, I think, for this team. But the reality is it's been like a repetitive cycle, and I think the Marlins know it's tough. it's tough. It's just a reality of the fact. But they won't. They gotta stay true to what they think is best for this organization. And if that means starting from scratch, that's what it means. If not, you're only delaying the inevitable. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, if it's now to do it, then do it now. And that's just the truth to it. The Marlins.
If you're gonna nickel and dime us as a fan base, then be straight up with us now.
Yeah, exactly. Just do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what this Jeter era before Peter came in was like, are you going to be cheap or are you guys going to spend? And then that was one of the things that frustrated Jeter, and which is why he left, which is kind of speculation. But I kind of believe it in a sense that he wanted the Marlins to spend. But it's like, hold your horses here. We're not the Yankees, you know. And
True.
You know, we can't spend like that.
Yeah.
But there were moments the Marlins had the opportunity to get JD Martinez.
Yeah, I remember that.
And,
I was a big proponent for that too.
And he was and
he would have fit right in.
And Jeter really wanted that, but that was too much money for Sherman and ownership.
Yeah.
So, you know, are we going to spend money? They did during that with Jeter's era, but it wasn't enough to kind of maybe stay competitive, especially with no good farm system. So at least now with Peter, we know for a fact that we're not going to spend money, and we know we're going to develop talent. Because in the Jeter era, we weren't developing talent, and we were barely spending money.
Right.
So at least we have a clear. So at least
we got something.
The Marlins have a lane, an identity. Isn't the prettiest one? I get it.
And is it going to work? That's
we
TBD.
have to wait and see.
Yeah, TBD.
But I think the Marlins, the biggest fail, or not the biggest fail, but the biggest curse the Marlins fans ever got was winning the World Series in 1997. Because after winning that World Series, they were trading players during the parade. Practically, they were trading players like Moises Alou and players away.
Yeah.
And that was the first fire sale.
2 years into the freaking organization.
5.
Was it 5?
93, yeah. It was
93, that's right.
But still, though, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, though. You know, how can you do that after winning a World Series?
Doesn't make any sense.
The Marlins went from winning the World Series in 97 to, in 1998, going 54 and 108. Like you lose a fan base like that from the jump. You lose it. And that's what happened to this organization.
It's carried.
No matter who is going to take over this team, you are not starting from zero with this fan base. You are starting in like hell and purgatory. Like you are starting way below in the net. Like because this fan base has seen a lot of crap,
painful, man.
And a lot of and there's been highs and lows like in every fan base and every organization. But in the recent history of this organization, there has been a lot of lows and barely any highs.
Yeah.
In the first 10 years of this franchise, a lot of highs.
Yeah.
And then you ruin those highs in that 10-year span with fire sales. And in 03, they did the same thing. The only thing after 03 and winning it in 03 was they kept that core together until 05, until they went completely fire sale. And then they shut it down completely.
Yeah, it was a disaster.
But after winning in 03, that if you look on the rosters, that core is still together. And they plugged in and plugged out players like getting Carlos Delgado and other guys like Armando Benitez as their close. They were keeping that core together, and they had winning seasons, but it wasn't enough.
Right.
You know, and then they went, screw it. We tried a couple years after 03. It's not working. Let's tear it down.
Yeah.
That's more understanding. Still sucks because you're not even 20 years old of the franchise, and you've had 2 massive fire sales. It's like there's no consistency. So and Luis Arraez is another example of fans not being able to rally behind a player. Think about this from a fan perspective as well. The Marlins have a player named Jeff Conine who they call Mr. Marlin, but when I think of players like that, like players you attach to an organization, you think of maybe not like it's hard to be a lifer like Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki. Like it's hard to be guys like that.
It's not super common.
But you think of guys like who have been at least like a decade with the team, or at least maybe like 7 or 8 years, but they won. They were very successful. Jeff Conine played like almost 20 years in the majors, and like a third of those seasons were with the Marlins. The only thing is that he was on both World Series teams and the first ever Marlins team. But even then, there was a period during this franchise that alumni of the organization, like greats like Conine and other players from the 03-97 team, they were banned, or they were not banned, but they weren't even invited to come to games. To be like, that
the face of the and the carrying of it. Like you see like the Jason Taylors of the world and Zach Thomas, like these older alumni guys that come in and they're still
all the
root
time.
for their team. Yeah.
And when Jeter came, this was a big deal when he came in. when Jeter first came in with the Marlins and during his tenure, this was a huge, step back forward for the fans because, when Jeter first came in, he fired everybody Marlins related, player wise. So Conine, Andre Dawson. Andre Dawson went to Southwest High.
Mm-hmm.
He played for the Marlins. He's a Hall of Famer. Like, what's his name? This guy, Tony Perez. Tony Perez. He's a Cuban legend, and he played for the Big Red Machine. He's very known within the Latin community here, and he was part of the Marlins for a long time, part of baseball culture, And you let guys like that, you let them go onto the street.
No, that's
and then Jack
ridiculous.
McKeon was the nail in the coffin. Is like
and
Jack
then,
McKeon was he was an 80-something-year-old man just being a scout, traveling. Like just let him do his thing.
Just let him be. Yeah. Let him enjoy it while he's still got it.
And you kick him to the streets, and it's like he's some dog, and it's like you lose fans like that.
Yeah.
It's on a player.
The little bit of loyalty that was left is basically gone at that point.
Now with Jeter gone, they kind of rekindled relationships and stuff. But still, though, it's like you lose fans that.
Yeah, you just continue to pull the threads out.
So from any angle you look at, if you're a fan, any way you go, from coaches, players, even personnel in the front office, there's no consistency. There's no one to rally behind. There's no one to root for, and. Hopefully with Peter at the helm now, that'll
kind of switch.
These players that come in right now, if you look at the roster, the only player that we can, I guess, really hopefully think, okay, these guys are going to stick around for the long term, are the young pitchers and maybe Jazz and Sandy, as the veteran guy.
Jazz has been on the trade rumors too, though.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised though if he's gone as well. Yeah. If you really want to start from scratch, then
it could
you
be
go
anybody
for it.
At this point.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone is on the table. There's no limits. Like everyone's
nobody's
available
safe at this point.
And I'm cool with that as a fan and as a passionate fan, as people have seen, I guess, from today.
Let's just move on and
just
figure
let
it
it
out.
be done.
Yeah.
Tear it down. Let's start from scratch and do it right.
Yeah.
And do it right because Jeter and we had no idea if that ownership. Are we rebuilding? Are we spending? Are we competing? So and then when they did make trades for prospects, it never turned out. Yeah. So do it right this time, hopefully, and then hope for the best. But this season is going to be a long one. We're only in the beginning of May,
and it's going to be a long season.
We haven't reached the dog days of summer left. But this team is
just enjoy it for the game and not enjoy it.
This team has had a plethora of injuries before Arias trade. This team.
It is what it is.
This team went 0-9 to start the year.
Growing pains.
Yeah, and then their manager in the middle or the start of the season finds out that his option is declined. So it's like, it's just a lot of bad stuff happening. Yeah. Then the Arias was like, okay, we get it now. Okay, we get it. We're gonna suck this year, and we're gonna rebuild. Like that was all right. You finally got. Peter never, ever told the media what his plan was.
It wasn't the expectation for sure. Not like this, but I think there's a lot with the Marlins that we could talk about, and I generally have like a million more questions.
Yeah, man. Whenever you want, fire away, man. As you guys see, I can talk about the Marlins forever. And don't even get me started with the fan experience. I generally do
because I think we could do a whole other episode on fan experience
man.
And how can that get better and kind of like that whole process with the stadium and how all that went down. So we're gonna do this again.
Thank you, man.
And we're gonna get into that.
Like a mid-season report.
Like a mid-season report. We could do a mid-season report, see what else transpires, because like he said, I don't think we're done with this fire sale. So maybe we let this fire sale go through
a little bit,
and then we do it again. Maybe around the trade deadline we could do something
in the summer for sure.
Yeah. And but I want to get into that whole other aspect too about like fan experience. Because
the food, even at the game.
Exactly, food. We've seen it, because we've seen crowds get pulled in there, and I'm not going to go on a tangent, but we've seen crowds get pulled in there for El Caribe Series World Baseball
Biggest
Classics.
Biggest crowd ever.
There's definitely something to be said there that there's a crowd and there's an audience, and I get it. Some people travel to come for that, but even if you can get a fraction of that audience into the stadium, it's a freaking win. So we will do another one soon, and we'll definitely talk about that.
Looking forward to that. Yeah, man.
You heard it here. We're fire selling, and it's going to be a long season, and nobody's safe. So we'll see what happens, and we'll be doing another one soon.
I'm looking forward to that, man.
I appreciate you for jumping on and doing this, man. It's fun.
Thank you, bro.
I'm glad we got to do it. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one. And Dave will probably be back. My co-host couldn't jump on, so usually it would have been the three of us on this. But he doesn't know baseball that well either. So I told him, I'm like,
I got you, man.
Honestly, better that you probably weren't even on this one. So we'll see you on the next one, Dave. Cheers. Thanks, guys.